Hello and welcome to episode number 160 of the Great Outdoors Photography Podcast. Hey there, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Brent Bergherm, and this is a special episode in that it is also a video episode as well as an audio-only episode. So you're going to see it on my regular YouTube channel. Of course, it's coming through on the audio podcast as well. Since we have a lot of visuals going on, I figured I wanted to kind of cover my bases and make sure that we have everything covered here. And I can show you everything that we're going to be doing, and I can show you some of the items. Of course, in the audio only, I will also be describing everything. So just like I normally do. So when we have photos that I'm talking about, you'll see those photos per usual. It's just, we're going to try this again where we put it both on my regular YouTube channel. So those of you here on YouTube, thank you for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Those of you in the audio only, if you would like to see this in a video presentation, then just follow that link in your show notes and you'll be taken right there. Also, you can follow the links to the website to where you can see the show notes website, which has the still images, or if you're not a member of the Facebook group, make sure you get to become a member of that Facebook group, and you'll also be able to see the images there as well. All right, so what are we talking about? We are going to be looking at, let me reduce this a little bit, and I want to show you this other video that I did just a little bit ago. I'll just bring up, here we go. I'll just bring up this item, and it's the In the Garden. So I published it on July 19, I believe it was, of this year, 2023, and it is all about just an experience of going out and shooting in the garden. So I photographed some sunflowers. As you can see on screen, I've got the initial bee and sunflower image there, but I also did a little bit of other shooting. And so go ahead and take a look at that video if you'd like. What we're talking about today, right here today, is the selection of those photos that I did shoot, and then, of course, going to come up and bring it to fruition with a fine art print that I'm going to be working on. And then I'm going to be doing another further extension. This one will be video only, and that is going to be a further extension where I'm going to be experimenting with different coatings for these prints. Now, I'll get into all those details here at the end as it relates to what's coming ahead, so I don't want to get too far bogged down into the nitty-gritty just yet. Let's just take a look at the images. We're going to then take a look at what it's all about with processing some of these images, just a few of them, and then we'll jump into the nitty-gritty a little bit anyway of what is coming ahead so we can understand what is my goal, what is my purpose, why am I even doing all this? Well, I'll tell you why I'm doing it all. I'm doing it all because, well, I just love photography and I love to do printing, but I also want to take advantage of these machines that I have. I've been blessed with 2 printers and, well, technically 3, but one of them is not working. So I've got a 44-inch over here, 13 by 19 over here, and I just want to be able to get more prints going. And so this is kind of the first start of that major push in that direction. So let's get right to it with these images. I started out with a sunflower and just the central portion of the sunflower. And yeah, this image, I don't know, it was just not really floating my boat, so to speak. So went quickly to a horizontal format, and I included a little bit of that yellow fringe up in the upper left-hand corner. And I really liked how this one came together because now I've got that bug in the lower right-hand corner, and then all the way through seeing the depth of field, seeing everything in sharp focus thanks to Helicon Focus. And I was able to just make that whole thing. Now, this was in the neighborhood of 400 images. You can see in this stack down here in my Lightroom film strip, I've got a 400 here. So this one that we're viewing, this is something that is the whole stack. But yeah, we have the roughly 400 images. Now, 400 was more than I needed. And so when I was shooting, if you haven't used Canon's system where you do the focus bracketing and then you tell it to do an increment and then you tell it to do how many images you want, You set the initial focus point, that is the closest focus point, and then it will just take that increment, and then it will shoot an image. It will increment you a little more in the autofocus. It will shoot another image, so on and so forth. When you're doing it pretty quick, when you're doing it, I should say it happens pretty quick when you're doing it. And I was also using the CF Express card, and that really, once it filled up the buffer, it was still able to go pretty quick to save to the CF Express card. But it still then would go about 20 to 30 image increments when it did that. It got up to about 200, 250 images before it started slowing down because of the buffer write time and all that other good stuff. But it then is able to, you just see it go back in space as it's going. You just have this little animation on your screen going with all of the subtle shifts in the focus. And then that is allowing you to really bring out these items in brilliant, sharp focus. And you get all the little bits of pollen and all the little wonderful little doodads and little goobers and whatever else. Just really cool stuff is what it comes out to be, really. So when I'm shooting this, though, what's interesting, that bug, he's doing his movement. He's moving his legs. He's kind of got his antenna going every which way. And you can actually see that from frame to frame. And so I decided I'm just going to let Helicon Focus choose which frames to put together. It did a pretty good job. I'm really pleased with how this came together. Even when I zoom in on it, I'm at a 50% view. I can start to see a little bit of what I might consider it to be an oopsie. This little antenna here, I could probably fix that a little bit, and then a little bit of something going on with the legs. The nice thing about this is I certainly know enough in Photoshop. I could fix this super easy, super quick. Now, am I going to do that? Effectively, no, not yet. I would do that if I had a use case where I needed to do that. Right now, when I share this as a screen-only type image, that's the last thing people think about. Is there 2 legs or is there 3 legs where there should be 2 legs, whatever the case is? What about that extra antenna? It actually, not the extra antenna, but that antenna, now it fades away. It actually looks normal when it's in the low-res view. But if I were to print this large, you can bet your last dollar I would be working on that to bring an extra level of perfection to it. And then I cut it off from going into full-on focus in this background area where all the yellow is, because I figured I didn't need all of that detail. The rest of this image is dark. I wanted to, yes, this is bright up here. It's a competing element. It's a good supporting element. But if it were to have super, super detail there, then it would just be competing for the eye. So I decided I didn't want to do that when it comes to thinking about my overall composition. I've got these 2 main things that are in the opposite corners. I've got the bug in the lower right, the bright yellow in the upper left, and all the stuff that makes the seeds, basically, that is inside that blossom of the sunflower in between. And I just want people to really focus on that bug. And again, that yellow is just a supporting element. The next image that I'm really pleased with, and I think what I'm going to do with this image, what I'm really tempted to do with this image, I think it's a good, what is it, probably a 1:3 aspect ratio, so it's 3 times wider than it is tall, and it is a cropped in version, a panorama type cropped in version, cropped in version of, not inversion, but anyway, of a sunflower blossom that is just almost bursting. We can see the yellow petals wanting to be released. We can see the hairy parts of the green, just wrapping around and sort of being unfolded a little bit. And all those little details of those little hairy things, hairy parts, whatever. I forget exactly how many images this was. This thing suggests here, I've got a little thing in the film strip saying 200. It was in the neighborhood of 200 images. Again, I don't think I used every single image that was in that sequence of images, but still, when I cropped it, that's where the power really came for me. If I back up an image here, and we'll take a look. Again, those of you in the audio only, you'll be able to take a look at the website, take a look at the Facebook group, and you'll be able to follow along. But if I back up a little bit here, then I have the full accomplishment, the full frame, as it were, and this is a nice image too. This is an intriguing and a good image. But when I crop the top and bottom a little bit, it just makes it a little more dynamic to me. What I would love to do is to find, and I need to look at my supplier. At work, I just bought a larger printer that will allow me to make metal prints. I can go up to 24 inches wide. Well, what if I were to make this superbly big? What if I were to take like a 20-inch panel, 20-inch square panel, and if I were to do 3 of them? And so I do it as a triptych, and it's 3 panels wide by 20 inches tall. Mind blown. That would be an amazing presentation for this image, I have a feeling anyway. So that is something that's definitely more of a longer term goal for this image. I could also split it in half. So if I were to do something right down the middle, and I have a left and a right side, so this would be a diptych, I could see that working as well. But that triptych idea where it's just massive and we have these metallic, these aluminum, somewhat glossy. I've experimented with matte, semi-gloss, and full-on glossy. And I really like this, usually, as is often the case, I really like the matte and the semi-gloss. The semi-gloss giving me a little bit deeper in the blacks, the dark colors. And so, whereas the super gloss, I'm just not sure I'm a fan. But on this particular subject, with those bright, brilliant yellows and those sharp little hairs, the renderings of those little hair-like things on the what ends up becoming the backside of the sunflower blossom, that could be something that is definitely something that is intriguing to me, and the glossy just might win the day on that. So yeah, the jury is still out a little bit. This is an area that I have not experimented a whole lot with. I've done a little bit of metal printing, and I've liked my results thus far. But to be able to have something that's massive, that is needing a little bit more of attention, needing a little bit more trial and error to know exactly what my results are going to be and what my impact is. Is it what I'm envisioning it to be? I think it's going to be really cool. But again, since I've not really done any of that, seen any of that, I just need to make it work and need to make it happen in order to see how it works, is probably what I should say. All right, the next series of images is a bee in the central portion of the sunflower. And I flagged this particular image that I'm showing first, because I just liked the position of the bee. We have a nice position of the sunflower, and then we have the bee in there. My real, I guess we could say, problem with this image is just simply that it almost feels like a normal image. It almost feels like a cliche image. So yes, it's a nice image. It's beautiful. It's well exposed, decently composed, and the bee is looking nice and sharp. When I zoom in, even when I go 100%, I mean, I have got wonderful little bits of pollen coming throughout the entire almost body of the bee. And look, when we look at his legs, those things are just coated with pollen. And then we look at the little details of the little flower pieces that he's crawling about, or she's crawling about on. There's just they're exploding with pollen. And those little bits of pollen are absolutely brilliant there. We're seeing everything about that. So the focus is perfect. Everything technically about this image is perfect, or at least near perfect. My thing is, I'm just not really, quote, feeling it. I like to have a little extra something, a little extra oomph. I want to put that little bit of me, whatever that thumbprint is, into my photography. And in this case, I'm not really feeling it. I did experiment with trying to get some focus stack ideas coming along with this. Those bees move so fast, though, comparatively. It just isn't worth it. And also, I tried it out more in the case of to keep up with the bees. What I found out was really working well was just to tap the screen so I could establish focus and then just mash that button. And as the shutter is going, I have it on hyperdrive. It just, that bee will move in and out of focus And I'm going to get some that work and I'm going to get some that don't work. Probably spent a good 500 frames on trying to get bees. I liked this particular next shot because the angle of the bee is, we're still mostly in the cliche part for what we expect out of this type of shot, but the angle of the bee is a little bit more different and is creating a little more energy from his position. And you see both sides of the legs, so the left side, the right side, and just how the pollen is just filling up. And then of course when I zoom in, we get to see the wonderful little details of the wings and the little veins, the little this and a little that, all these other things are just awesome. But yeah, look how, when he's just, you zoomed in and you just see all these wonderful details. This is why I love macro. It's amazing. But again, as an overall encapsulation of the image, technically I think there's lots of wonderful things going here, and I'm proud of this image. That's why I'm showing it to you. It's a great image. It's just not one of those images that rises to the level of, I'm going to make this one of my prints and I want to do it so it's brilliant and gorgeous and all these other fine things like that. All right, we're going to come to the end here pretty quickly of these images. There's a lot of time that goes into shooting, of course. A lot of time that goes into post-production. And I'll show you some of these items here in a moment as it relates to what I did for post-production. But as we're finishing off with these 3 images of the dill, I had a bit of serendipity happen. My battery actually wasn't full when I started shooting, and I'm shooting all these bees, I'm shooting all these different sunflower things and all sorts of just wonderful items there. And then I moved over to photograph the dill, and as I'm photographing the dill, getting lots of focus stacks going on, the battery little warning comes up, and I'm like, oh man, shoot, got to change my battery. So I modify, move the ball head so I can have greater access, easier access to the battery compartment, go get my battery, come back, pop it in, establish it, turn the camera on without moving the camera. And then this scene here that I have, my next image pops up, and I'm like, that's kind of interesting. This is not something that I was looking forward to, not something that I was looking at any type of preconceived idea, any type of what can I do? Now these abstracts, these ideas where we're grabbing an image that is more ethereal in nature, that is definitely something that intrigues me. That's definitely something that really is something I'm highly interested in, but it's not usually something that just happens super quick, is I guess the best way to put it. It's usually something I have to think about and contemplate and more or less be in the mood for, so to speak. And today on this day of shooting, I was all about getting in there with some focus stacks and really trying to nail down this idea of what's my best bet? What's the most efficient way I can work with focus stacks? How can I maximize the use of this macro lens that I have? What's all that about? How can I make this work? How can I make it happen? And when this showed up, I was like, interesting, I've got something here. And so then I moved the camera just a wee bit, and then this image came in, and I was like, okay, this one is it. I was just absolutely thrilled to get this image. And this is the one that I think is my top level of the day's shooting. And so this is going to be the one that I take to the print process to finalize it. When I look at some other images like this last one we're going to look at today, well, I might show some of the others too, but more along the lines of we have something really close to the camera which is out of focus, and it creates this ethereal fog. This nature of the subject is really softened. And with different zoomings, where we get rid of this next image, we get rid of the little blossoms at the ends of those dill items, but we have everything kind of coming to the center, and it's hard to kind of see. For those of you on the video experience, I'm going to zoom in here, and okay, they're out of focus. Actually, there are some bugs in here at the very core of these pieces of dill. In the image that I ended up saving, those bugs are, I guess, technically out of focus. But anyway, here's one where we can see. And there's one of them little bugs there. And these, again, are just things that you just don't see otherwise. And to know that they're there now, it's almost scary. It's crazy. Let's take a look actually at a little bit of some of the processing. I told you I'd do that, and then we'll look at the prepping for getting this to a print, making this into a print. Well, in some of these images, I'm not going to be able to say much because this isn't about showing you exactly what happens in Helicon Focus. So I take these 200 images, I kick them out to Helicon Focus. When I do that, I like to send the DNG info, so I get a raw set of data going on there. And so you can see in this particular framing, this particular set of images, when I go to the develop settings, I have no changes here. The only changes that are going to show up are the changes that I have applied to every single image, bar none, mostly, upon import. And that is going to be to take a look at removing chromatic aberrations, taking a look at our lens profile to enable the profile corrections. Usually that's something I want to do. Certainly I'm always looking for that. If I see an anomaly of something that's happening, then especially initially, I'm like, let's check out those profile corrections. Let's see if that messed up for some reason. And then on my detail here, I like to take my detail to 75, and the Adobe standard is, 25? Yeah, it's 25. And so I like to take that to 75 because effectively what that does is that counteracts at least a bit the anti-aliasing filter that's built into my camera. If you don't have an anti-aliasing filter, I would expect this to basically do nothing for you, but it will usually give me just a half an ounce more of a smidgen of extra sharpness in the image at a fundamental level. And when I'm just doing things quickly, I guess we can say, the default standard that I like to work with, 75 is usually there. So when I say that it's straight out of camera and no changes, I always have to remember upon import, there is a small section, a small amount of these developed changes that I have applied to every single image. And then that is my foundation point. I move from there. So I'm just kind of covering myself because, those changes were made. When I bring it into Helicon Focus and it processes the raw data, well, then it sends raw data back to Lightroom, and then I'm able to do the processing and make all that happen. So we have some masks. I like to start with some masks, and to show you what I did, I should say, I like to start with masks. So I just have this thing called Extra Vignette, and so when I click on that and hover over it, we can see where the red shows up on screen, and I just have a little bit of darkening in the upper left-hand corner because I just figured I needed a little bit of darkening going on there. It was just a little bit too bright. The eye was attracted too much. Now it's called Extra Vignette. That must mean that there is some standard vignette. And so that's under the effects panel in Lightroom. And then I have the amount it is first off, the style for the post-crop vignetting is set to highlight priority. And then the amount is set to -18. And then all the other items are at their default values. So I labeled that mask Extra Vignette kind of sort of to remind me, hey, I've got another standard vignette going on with this image. And I guess it's important to point out this is post-crop vignette. I do have some cropping going on in this image, so it's happening after that cropping happens. All right, we have some detail, which we've already seen. That is happening. HSL color. So I took my yellows and I just took the hue and did a -2 adjustment on the hue. Basically, I felt they were just a smidge too green. Now, certainly I could have done a little bit of that green adjustment, so to speak, in the basic panel with the tint, which is currently at +56. But I wanted to affect just the yellows. All the other things, the greens, the other dark colors and things like that, those are fine. I didn't have a problem with them. It was just the yellow itself. I was like, I just want to bring in a little more smidge, bring that yellow, whatever that is, push it towards the orange, take it away from the green, and affect it a little bit more that way. And I was pretty happy with that. The saturation and luminance on a color by color basis, I didn't change. But when we go back to the basic panel, we can see all the other changes. So yes, I brought up that exposure about 0.8 of a stop. And then the shadows, I brought them up to a plus 25. The whites, I brought to a plus 48. I really wanted those to really shine. And as I look at my histogram, I'm making sure, though, I'm not clipping anything out. Although, let's face it, with these little slivers of these little hairy type things, if those were to clip out to pure white, when I print this, when you're on screen, or when I print this, you're probably not going to notice that hardly at all. And so, because it's just a small area. And so if I were to have the clipping highlight warning go off on that, I don't think I would have too much of an issue. Now, as I look at my histogram, if I were to print this image, and I look at my histogram, I would actually get a little bit nervous because my dark areas, my shadow areas, they are a bit filled in. And so I would probably take that shadows slider and move it just a touch more. And then I could also think about taking my black slider and putting that a touch on the positive side so that I don't have too much, if anything, fully clogging in, fully coming in. Because right now, I've got a whole lot. You can see a very significant spike, especially in the blue channel, where I just have probably the last, I'm going to say 3% of that histogram, 2 or 3% of that histogram, it just takes off with a spike on the left-hand side. And so that's just something when I go to print, I want to be concerned about, especially depending on which paper I'm going on. Since I'm looking at some matte materials today that I'm going to be printing on, I'm going to be a little bit nervous about that because usually, very frequently, when I go on a very flat matte surface, the dark tones tend to just fall apart. I've had this happen with 2 of my favorite papers, paper manufacturers. A very nice matte, the Barrio Photographique matte by Kansan Infinity, which is a coated matte paper, but still, it's just a beautifully flat matte surface. And then the breathing color, as far as the most testing I've done, is the Optica one and the Pure Smooth. Beautiful, gorgeous papers, but those really, really deep shadows, there's a lot of extra attention you need to give there because that matte paper tends to just, the way I describe it, I say it falls apart. What happens there is what you exactly see on screen as it relates to how you interpret the detail. It tends to flatten out and it tends to not be translated well to paper, where if you have the glossy or the luster type surfaces, then you're going to be doing a little bit better. It's going to be coming out a little bit better on that. All right, so a texture of plus 10, a clarity of plus 20, and then that's it. You can see my saturation and vibrance I left alone, and that's that very simple processing on this particular image. All right, let's finish up with the one that we're going to prepare for printing. I'm going to show you those process settings and talk through those process settings. And that is the image that I have still decided. I haven't come up with a better title for it. So it's Dill Dreaming. And so this is dill. My wife loves to make our own pickles. She's got a pickle recipe that I love, and then she's got a pickle recipe for she and the boys. And so we got a lot of dill out in the garden, and she looks to sell the dill to local folk as well so they can make their own pickles. Well, anyway, like I mentioned, this just kind of came about thankfully because my battery died and I needed to change my battery. All right, so when I'm talking here, let me take a look here, start off with the masks because I have a lot more masks in this one. So I've got what I call a light path mask, a custom vignette, and then one that's just called mask 1, and then a clarity transition. All right, so with that light path mask, when I mouse over it, we can see that item come through as to where it's applied. Basically, there's this almost, it's a reflected C shape, so a backwards C shape in the central portion of the image. It starts in the lower left-hand corner where that prominent little piece of dill, whatever's little tiny flowers is. it kind of swoops down just slightly as it goes to the right, then it swoops up around the central portion and then starts to come back towards that item, but it ends at some of these other elements, these other radiant items where the blossom things are. When I click on that, we'll be able to see the changes. The only thing I did was I took the exposure and increased it by 0.18 of a stop, and that is just ever so slight. And those of you that are watching the video, I'll take the eyeball and toggle it on and off. And now that you see it, you're kind of, oh, okay, I can see what the point and the purpose is there. There's a little bit of visual energy that is created, and it's almost experienced in a subconscious fashion because it's not very much, but it's still there, and it connects these elements. What I wanted to do is connect these elements both on screen, your experience on screen, and certainly, more importantly, when you experience the print. I want this to be something that is a good visual experience for the viewer. All right, let's talk about the custom vignette a little bit. And so I have a negative 0.63 of a stop on the custom vignette. And let's see, I don't think I did anything else. I'm scrolling through. I did not do anything else on the custom vignette. So just taking a brush and painting in the areas that I want to darken just a little bit. And this is what's interesting when I do a vignette, especially because I'm dealing with exposure in this regard. I have two controls, well, technically I guess three controls, about how strong this is applied. The first off is the brush settings. I can have a brush that is really gently applied and relatively transparent, I guess is what we can call it. And then in the same mask, I could have another brush stroke that is more deeply applied, or more of it is applied. So it's less transparent, it's more opaque. And so more of that setting, whatever I tell it to do, in this case a negative 0.63 on the exposure, it's going to get a stronger application of that negative 0.63, whereas the other, where I only maybe have one brush stroke, is going to get a weaker accomplishment of what's going on there. So I need to balance that out when I'm doing my changes. And balancing out may not be the exact right way to call it, but I need to take that into consideration as the best way to put it. So I know that I'm getting the right amount of vignetting, the right amount of darkening in these corners. Now, one thing I could do is I could just set my brush all the way to 100% on the, I don't even remember what it is now, flow, and 100% on the density. And that will make sure that every single spot, unless of course it's a feathered brush, which I usually do as well, but every single spot will always be equal in its application to the strength of what I'm applying. And so when I apply -0.63, every single application of that brush will be applied at -0.63. So just because I have -0.63 here doesn't necessarily mean I have that applied equally everywhere, because I usually will feather it in with multiple brush strokes where the flow is low. In this case, 25 is where it's set, and the density is set to 100. So it would take me 4 strokes to get up to 100. And I like it that way. It really softens how the application of that influence of that brush is applied and seen in the image. All right, the next one, called Mask 1, is just a little radial mask around that little cluster in the somewhat lower left-hand corner of the frame. And the only thing I did there was I took the clarity and bumped up to 52. I figured I needed something to really make that one stick out. And then my clarity transition is just a gradient blend. And this thing is really wide. It starts almost at the far right-hand side and goes almost to the far left-hand side. And then it's a smooth transition from one to the other. And that is set to a clarity of -51. And the reason I did that, let's get off this and go and take a look at what my standard clarity settings are. So my standard clarity settings that are global and applied to the whole thing is actually only 8. So there's not much there. But here's the thing. I call this dill dreaming, and my left-hand side of the image is very ethereal and very soft and very just dreamy-like. The negative clarity actually gave me that option. It gave me that sense or that feeling in the image, and that's what I really liked. I really wanted that to happen. I liked the deep, dark values that are coming through in the upper right-hand corner of this image, and then it transitions to this dreamy etherealness in the left-hand corner of this image with that one object that I brought back in pretty strongly to say, this one we want to make sure people notice, make sure people look at. And so that heavy clarity applied to that little object really helps achieve that goal. All right, the remainder of the settings. I mean, I've got a little bit of crop going on, so yeah, I got that. There's actually a little bit of a spot healing thing going on. I don't remember exactly what I did there and what I was covering, but I was obviously covering something, and that's all right. So I did something there with that. My exposure, I gave it a negative 0.2 exposure, and then the texture went crazy. It's a 68 on the texture, so the little nitty-gritty details are really just granularly highlighted, as it were. And then my standard items in the sharpening and the lens stuff in the detail and the lens corrections areas, that's going to be happening. But otherwise, not a whole lot. Everything is in the masks. Most everything is in the masks in this image. And I think that's the power of selective editing like this, being able to put in those masks and be very, as one of my clients put it, very surgical with the targeting, with the way that I'm deciding what's going to happen in this part of the image, what's going to happen in that part of the image, thinking about how it works as a whole, and gives you, the viewer, the experience I'm hoping that you'll have as the viewer. All right, since I'm going to take this image and I want to print this image, I need to do a few things first. So I'm going to bring up the website for Breathing Color. And so what I'm doing here, I want to make sure that I'm downloading properly and have them installed, the ICC profiles for this paper. So I'm going to go to my library. I've chosen to have it shown up here when I go to the Go menu in Finder. If it doesn't show up for you, just hit Option, and then Library will show up for you here. So I'm going to go to my personal library. So if I were to look at this, it's under the Users folder, under My Home folder, and then Library. You can put these profiles in a different location. If you have multiple users and you want every user on the computer, then you should put it under the System library. I just put it under my personal library because that's easier to do. So I'm going to go down to Color Sync folder. I'm going to go to Profiles, and I've got, so all these items for BC. That's for Breathing Color. I've got the live canvas. That's what I want to print on. But it's for the 900 series printers. So I've got a 9900, Epson 9900 over here, 44-inch machine. That's not the one I'm going to be printing on today. I'm going to actually print on my Canon Pixma Pro 10. So I need to download another one for the Canon Pixma Pro 10. I then have the Optica 1. And so I've got the Optica 1, two of them here. So for the 4900, which is a printer at work, and the 9900, which is this one here, all right, again, I need it for the Canon. So let's go ahead and find those items here on the Breathing Color website. All right, very nice and friendly. They have a link way up here at the top called ICC Profiles. So let's click on that. We're going to click and select Canon, and then I'm going to go with the Pixma Pro 10 because that's where I'm at on my Canon. And then I just look at the various items they have. Optica 1, absolutely. Let's hit that download. And then I'm going to be looking at live canvas. Oh, right up there. It's a live matte canvas. All right, then we want to make sure we put these in the proper location. So here again is my profiles. So my user folder, library, color sync, profiles is where it goes. And then I need to bring up my downloads that I just downloaded. And I'm going to copy them over here. Now this is interesting. I've never seen them come in. Notice these others are all called ICCs, but when I copy these in that I just downloaded, it comes in as ICM. I have actually never seen that. All right, but I also want to take note. The media type, hugely important. just standard canvas here, and then whatever MPP-HQ is. So I'm going to mark those down. And now it's time to head back over to Lightroom and see what we got with our abilities to get everything set up in print. Now, here's the thing about today's video. I'm going to take us through the setup process, but I'm not going to actually print them right now in this video. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to get several copies out because on each material. Because what I want to do, I want to experiment with different coatings that I have to play around with. So I've got a brush-on coating, a brush-on gel medium that I plan on utilizing, and I'm looking for that as I am sitting here in my home office, trying to remember exactly where I placed it. It could be in the house. And so I'm going to do an experiment with some brush-on stuff. Well, actually, it's not, truth be told, not that much of an experiment because I've done it lots of times before and I like the results. But we're going to show you what it's about and how it goes and all that stuff in the next video. Then I also have the timeless varnish. Let's go back. Did I mess up? Let's go back to Breathing Color for a moment and take a look here at their varnishes. And their timeless varnish, I have two different types of this varnish. I have their satin and their matte varnish. And I've already done these tests with black and white prints, and I'll be able to show some of those results. But to take it onto the canvas and to play around with it on a color print with the Optical One paper, that's going to be pretty cool. I'm going to be really excited about doing that. And so I would just want to see, again, as I roll it on, as I get it figured out and I'm understanding what the whole process is and all these things for what it does to my images, what it does for my photography, I'm going to then be able to hopefully make the best decision as to what I'm going to offer when I offer a print. So if I have a particular image that would be most benefited from having the painted on texture, well, then I'm going to do the painted on texture. If I have an image that would be most benefited from having the satin or the matte coating here on the varnish, then I'm going to do that. And then finally, there's going to be another one. I think this will be its own video. I'm going to be looking at experimenting with just literally taking the image and then painting it with just regular paints and seeing how that goes. I've done it once with a black and white already, and this is totally way out of my comfort zone. And it is something that I'm excited to do, but it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of investment. So we'll see if I can do that, but I'm sure I'll make that its own video when I get to that point. So yes, next video is going to be all about these other coatings, the brush-on coating and these roll-on coatings. These are timeless varnishes that Breathing Color sells. Okay, when we are here in Lightroom, let's get back to the print mod, or back to Lightroom and then over to the print module. So when we're in the print module, we can see I've got a little bit of an overlay here. It says page 1 of 1, 24 by 16, Epson 9900. All right, how do we set this? Well, I have this set to just automatically show up here, so that's one thing. But down here on the lower left-hand side in Lightroom of the print module, we have this thing called Page Setup. And we're going to be able to select our printer. And so I'm going to go with the Pro 10 series, and then I'm going to choose not a custom, I'll go all these different custom ones I have, but I'm going to choose a Tabloid Plus. So where are we? It's an A3 Plus, 13 by 19. There it is, A3 Plus, paper margin 30. Or I've got some of these others, borderless and so on. All right, the thing about the paper margin 30, that's what I'm going to have to do. I know I'm going to have to do this because I'm going on my Canon, and it's considered a fine art paper. Both these are going to be considered, quote, fine art papers, which means it's thick and it thinks it needs a 30 millimeter border. That's why we have this margin of 30. That stands for a 30 millimeter border that I cannot print to. All right, I'm going to go ahead and select that because I know I want to do this anyway. And my whole goal is to have about an inch or so border at a minimum on my 13 by 19 prints. So let's take a look at what happens there with that. But let's go to our print settings here now, and let's change this to the Pro Series, and then we're going to hit save. And now we've changed our printer to the Canon, so we know Lightroom is now going to communicate with the right printer. All right, so that changed it to show the printer, but of course we're still we are horizontal. We can actually, I should have done this before, we can actually change this when we do our orientation here. We can do landscape, and that should go ahead and rotate it for us, and it looks great now. All right, so we can choose to rotate to fit. If we were to have left it vertically oriented as it relates to how Lightroom is previewing it, well, let me just show you. I'll just show you for those of you on the video. I go back to portrait, and we can see how it gives me just a huge margin top and bottom, but not on the sides. And so yeah, we want to make sure that we do that. Oh, but I was going to say, if I hit rotate to fit, of course, it rotates the image and it fills, quote unquote, fills the frame. By the way, that 30 millimeter margin is limited to the top, the lead edge of the paper. So the front edge and the rear edge. If I were to change this, if I were to go to page setup and I go and I select the borderless, then I should be able to more fully see it's going to take, well, I now have full capability of reaching those margins there, and I can increase my height there and do all this, and I can take advantage of the full size. But I know that in order to select the media items that I want to be able to select, I'm going to have to be able to select this anyway, and so it chops it back down with those defaults, and that's totally fine. I'm okay with that. All right, but so here's the thing with, I'm going to take off zoom to fill because I want the entire image that I had cropped in Lightroom to always show up. I don't want the print module to zoom in to fill the what they call the cell, that is the area that's defined that could be printed. The print module will zoom in and crop the image once again. All right, so, and let's go back. I'm really confusing everyone now. I'm going to go back and hit the landscape, and so we can have it showing landscape, and then here comes the important stuff. All right, so my 1.18 inches, that's my 30 millimeter margin. All right, on my top and bottom though, what if I wanted 1 inch margins there? All right, the fact that on the margin here for the left and right side, that's still 1.18. But when I scoochie that in, I'm not actually, on the left side, I'm moving it. I'm not actually resizing the image until I get to about almost 3 inches. I am shifting that image over. I don't want to do that. Come on, 1.18. There we go. And so by putting these equal in size, I'm guaranteeing that I'm going to be in the center of the image. And by having the top and bottom of 1 inch, I'm guaranteeing that I have a 1 inch margin at a minimum. It can be larger than that, but at a minimum, I have a 1 inch margin. So I'm good to go with it. I like what's happening here. I like how this is being placed on the paper. Now, I could certainly do this at 0.75 inches. If I want to change my top and bottom margin to 0.75. And why didn't it take it on that one there? There we go. 0.75 on top and bottom. Still gives me a nice margin. And then I have whatever the size is, this is way different. I'm going to take a little bit of a step backwards. Those of you that have seen some of my prints and the things that I'm doing, almost all the time, whether you were a member or bought my course, my online course that I had about fine art printing, master photo printing is what it's called. When you go through that, I'm really picky about get your size figured out, what you want to do, get the sharpening settings just fully understood so you can have the exact experience you want your viewer to have. This is a completely different way of going about it. This is reacting to basically the size of the material and saying, oh, I just want a 3/4 of an inch margin on top and on bottom. So it's just a different line of thinking. This is a lot simpler and a lot easier to set up and manage for sure versus doing it in Photoshop. You have easier control over certain aspects of things than you do when you are in Photoshop, but also there's some things that you just don't have control over. That's why I like going to Photoshop, because I do then get absolute control over my sharpening, my output sharpening settings, which is hugely important. You've got your capture processing, your creative processing, and your output processing. Each of those needs to be addressed. If you want the ultimate manifestation of your print, each of those needs to be addressed in its own unique way. What I'm doing here today, I'm testing material and I'm testing processes. Will this be something that I decide to shift to for my normal process of how I do the work in the future? Well, it might be. It's something that I'm open to, but I just wanted to kind of double check myself, or cover myself as it were, to explain, yes, I love the being picky because you get so much control when you do it in Photoshop. But here, it's just easy to do and easy to manage. So I like easy as well. Plus, I don't have extra files that I have to worry about. That's also nice. I completely will admit that. That is really nice to not have to worry about those extra files. Going to skip all these items. Lightroom in the print module has a lot of items. Whether you want to put an identity plate item on there, you can put a logo, you can put a watermark, you can put all sorts of things on there. I'm going to skip those items. My print resolution, it's coming in at 240. That's going to be great, especially for a fine art paper, which is a little bit looser anyway, or my canvas that I'm going to be printing on. It has a weave. It will show some detail for sure, but with these different pieces of texture, these different items that are in the paper, those are going to be getting in the way, as it were, of the print and its resolution. And so resolution isn't a huge deal. Now, I'm not going to be going at 6 or nothing like that. It's just 240 is a really nice resolution. It's an even multiplier for both of my printers, and I always like even multipliers when it comes to printing for those numbers. Makes it just nice and easy for me to calculate and do stuff like that. All right, so on the color management, here we go. This is the important part. I loaded those profiles. Let's make sure that they're actually available. If they're not available, I'm going to have to quit Lightroom and bring them in again. All right, so I'm going to hit Other here, and then I should be able to take my... Now, see, they don't appear to be available. So, because they would show up here at the top of the list, and I don't have it for the Pro. Oh, here it is. Nope, that's the Moab Entrada. So see, it says Pro 10. So I'm just going to hit OK here. And I need to effectively reset this. So what I've found to be the case is to just completely close down Lightroom, and then when I open it back up, it will be there. So we're going to do that. All right, let's see if that worked. I closed down Lightroom. I brought it back up. I'm all the way down here. I go to Profile. I hit the Other tab, and now I've got my live Pixma Pro 10, and then I've got my Optica 1 Pixma Pro 10. Beautiful. Now this will be fun. Does it actually add it to my list that I have available to me here? Because the last time I did this, it didn't actually add it to the list. That was really disappointing for me. All right, so here is, and even though it's ICM, it still worked. So that's nice. You remember I said I've never seen an ICM before. What's going on? But here it is, the ICM. It worked beautifully. And then my rendering intent, either perceptual or relative, and it gives us this little thing: preserves out of gamut detail, but may change in gamut colors. All right. When it says it preserves out of gamut detail, it's really important to understand what that means, but may change in gamut colors. All right. So what we're dealing with is we have the image in the ProPhoto color space, which I guarantee you I cannot see even probably half of those available colors on my monitor. My monitor is just a little bit less than sRGB. But the printer, it has a much larger gamut than what's available to be viewed on my screen here, but it's not the same as ProPhoto. So it says, but it might change. It may change in gamut colors. So what that's doing is, if you had a range of colors, let's take a particular blue. My left hand here is going to be 0 saturation, and my right hand is full saturation. And if I were to then take all of those colors in that particular hue, and I were to squish them down, imagine this: all these colors are assigned on a spring, and I squish it down. What it's talking about there is preserves out of gamut detail. So the detail of those colors that are out of gamut, I have a color here, color here, color here. That relationship of where those colors appear on that sliding scale, as it were, that relationship is maintained, but the relationship of everything is compressed like a spring. When we go to relative, it says preserves color accuracy, but clips out of gamut detail. All right, let's do that same thing. 0 saturation, full saturation. It says it preserves color accuracy. So of those colors that are within the gamut of the printer, it doesn't touch them at all. Those colors that are out of gamut of the printer, it just goes and chops them off, and the only thing they can do is become this color here. It's been my experience that this printer and my Epson as well, both printers, tend to do really good on the relative because 90-some% or more of my colors that I have anyway are fully capable of being reproduced by either of these two printers. So I'm not that nervous that I'm going to be chopping off a whole lot of stuff. And if I were to have 1 or 2 or 3 pixels or whatever that is a really weird color that's way out of gamut, well, then Perceptual is going to cause all that compression just to make sure that the relationship between that color and the other colors, we want to maintain that relationship, that perceptual relationship. Usually that's not that important to me. So the relative, that guarantees that what I'm seeing on screen, as best as possible, is going to be represented here on printer, because I'm not going to be shifting any of those colors that are within gamut. And I like that idea. I like how that is. Now, sometimes, yes, perceptual is necessary. What's the right one for you? Well, experience will tell you which is the right one for you. All right, so I have this all set up. I just need to load my paper. Well, first I need to make sure I don't have any clogs. So I'm going to do some nozzle checks and stuff like that. I then need to load my paper, and I need to then make it happen, make it work. So there's that. That's it. Again, but please take a look. Watch out for my next video that's coming out, where I'm going to be doing a deep dive into what it takes to do these different coatings to preserve and make sure that these prints last as long as they can. And so that'll be in the next video here on YouTube. For those of you in audio land, I'm going to invite you to take a look at my YouTube channel and watch those items because I want to be able to make sure we get those things covered there. That certainly doesn't mean that I wouldn't talk about it briefly in the next audio podcast, but as far as seeing all the details and walking through the entire process and things like that, that's definitely going to be something that we'll put there on the YouTube. All right, and I guess also one more idea on the goal, the purpose of doing all of this. I want to just do prints. I want to make them available for sale, and we'll be covering some other items like that with some much shorter videos that talks about the print. And I haven't done a deep dive on exactly what this print means to me and all that other good stuff. I've told you a little bit about it, but that's what would happen also when I finally get to the point where this print is released, when everything is done and everything is ready to be released. That's where a deep dive conversation is going to happen about the nature of that print and how, not only recapping how it came about, but just why it's just so beautiful, I guess, and the reason why it rose to that level to be one of my monthly releases, or again, it might be a quarterly release. I'm still thinking about that, but here we go with the first one, and it being, we'll call it a monthly release at this point. All right, a dose of inspiration for you as I look to close the show. Genesis 2:15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it." English Standard Version. I like that because it really takes us back, pun intended, to our roots. And as we work our field out here, and the wife and I have had many a conversation about what we're doing with our farming and what fits for us and what works, because we've got a boy in college and another boy going to the local high school, two boys being homeschooled, me with my full-time job. There's just a lot of things that are needing to be maintained as far as life is concerned. And then we have this 5-acre farm, and it's like, there's a lot of work. Yeah, we've been talking about that, and boy, howdy, do we totally enjoy the working out there. This is something that is fundamental to the human core, and if it's not something that you have had an opportunity to try out, to play with, to understand, then all I can do is encourage you to say, give it a try. Even if it's, especially, I should say, if you live in an urban center and your options are really limited, get yourself a potted plant. That is a beautiful way to start. You've got the dirt, you have the need to water it. It's going to grow, it's going to do things as it grows. And the seasons, it will change through the seasons most likely. And that's a beautiful way to start this idea, this notion of some type of gardening, some type of going back to an original fundamental purpose for man, purpose for all mankind. And there's something there. I'm convinced anyway, there's something there that is really meaningful with that. All right. And then Janet Kilburn Phillips, her quote that I have here, "There are no gardening mistakes, only experiments." One could argue with that. Only experiments. I love experimenting, and I also love figuring out processes, and I love making things work. And gardening is the perfect way to satisfy lots of those different types of things, and finding out things that just work. And what's hugely important, like I mentioned, me and the wife have been talking about finding out what works for us, what makes sense for what we want to do, and how we are looking to do it. It takes experiments, and it takes testing things out and figuring things out and getting to know what works for you. And the same goes for your photography and your creative life. The same goes for your career. The same goes for relationships and all sorts of aspects of life, is to test the waters and seek to understand what works for you. And I hope that you're able to do that. Again, whether it's gardening, whether it's your photography, any aspect of life, is good to explore these things and get deep into it. All right, that's it for today. We'll see you in the next episode. Between now and then, take a look at the YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe there. Make sure you follow the podcast in your favorite podcast player. Check out my Instagram. Just search my name, Brent Bergherm, on Instagram. And that's pretty much it. Oh, I mentioned the Facebook group. That will be the very last link, whether it's here in the description on YouTube or there in the showcase podcast show notes in your app that you're listening to it there. Make sure you head on over to that Facebook group, because I'd love to see some interaction there. You'll be able to see the pictures, comment, ask questions, and all sorts of good things that are always going on there. All right, take care. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, God bless and happy shooting.